Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest I'm a Founder webinar, number 7, would you believe, which is on marketing and PR best practice during these COVID-19 times. I'm delighted today to be joined by Gemma Dunn of Missive, Emanuele D'Amico of our own Ignition Financial, we'll call him Manu for short, and Joe Plissier of Plissier Communications. Before we get going in the panel and introduce ourselves, I would just like to just say, look, if you do have any questions during the session, please do write them in the Q&A box. If you could avoid putting them in the chat box, that would help us enormously. Or you can raise your hand as well if you'd like to ask a question directly, but the Q&A box seems to work pretty well in recent weeks. So today we're going to be talking about marketing essentials for startups, and really, and also content management and a PR perspective. So I'm looking forward to learning quite a lot today because this is not my natural domain at all. And so I think we have a poll before we introduce the panel. Yes, I'd be grateful if some of you could give us your answers here. First of all, do you feel your business has struggled to stay visible and relevant over the past few months? And the second one is, has the amount of time invested in communicating with clients and prospects increased or decreased since COVID-19 started? Okay. So a few more minutes just to while that poll is up. And I think we'll turn to our panel now. And Gemma, I wonder if you could introduce yourself first.
Yes, happy to. Thanks, Adam. Great to be here. So my name is Gemma Dunn. I am an Associate Director at Missive. So Missive, we are a strategic communications and PR agency, hesitate to say usually based in London. Right now, the team's working virtually across pretty much the whole of the UK. So we work in the technology sector with brands across all different sectors, so spanning financial services, energy, telco, property, any kind of sort of high growth or established brands looking to disrupt industries using technology. That's kind of my short introduction.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Manu, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm Manu. I guess some of you know me. I work with Ignition. I've been taking care of all the marketing and content for the past 2 years almost.
For those who don't know Manu but are familiar with our newsletters, we've been having a lot of compliments about the newsletter and the regular updates, tips, advice, and also through to our webpage, and that is largely down to Emanuele, with quite a lot of influence also from our final guest, Joe Plissier.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, Joe Plissier, thanks for letting me speak today. I have an agency, and what we do is we advise businesses on the communication strategy. We also look at branding, and we also do content marketing. So we look at quite a sort of broad range of things. And we do that for organizations which range from England Rugby, the European Commission, as well as entrepreneurial organizations such as Ignition Financial.
Thank you very much, Joe. Very kind indeed. And I should say, look, if there's any questions or information you'd like to know further, then I know all three of our panelists will be only too happy to answer questions during this webinar or afterwards. And there are some resources as well, which we'll point out to you on Plissier Communications website and also on the Missive website, and of course, Ignition Financials as well. Okay, so the results of the poll are in, and some of the businesses have struggled a little bit to stay visible. Joe, maybe if we turn to you, what do you think about these results that the flash polls have come up with? Is this what you would expect?
Yes, I mean, I'm interested in how they actually combine with a lot and a little, because your maths is going to be better than mine. So that's sort of over 80, which sort of almost implies that there is mainly struggling going on that side of it. And I think that's because people have to adapt to how they're going to communicate. and how they're going to sort of stay visible. And I think the really big thing that, and Gemma and I were talking about this earlier on, about how you actually stay visible is almost more important than trying to sort of win new business. And I'm just looking at the second one now, amount of time invested. Oh, that's good. Because it's sort of 50% feel that's increased. I think that's really, really positive, which almost seems slightly sort of counterintuitive to the other one, that they're struggling, but they're still investing more time. I don't know if anybody else has any other. Gemma, have you got any observations on that?
Yeah, I'm interested that a third of people are saying that they haven't, the amount of time they spent in communicating with clients and prospects has actually decreased. I think that's quite interesting. I would have expected people to say increased or either the same or stayed about the same. I wonder if there are kind of other, that to me implies that communication has been, it's been slowed down because perhaps other areas of priority have sprung up, understandably. And we can come on to kind of talk about, the whys and hows of communicating during COVID and why it's so important. So that's quite interesting. Obviously positive that half have said it's increased, because I think, this is a time when prospects and clients, as Joe was saying, need reassurance that you are operating business as usual. And if you're not able to, what steps you have in place to return to that. So I would say, communication is key right now.
And yeah. I think also just one other thing, given that we're dealing with a lot of small organizations here, that there was a report that came out from eConsultancy and Marketing Week at the end of last month that said that only about 7% of businesses were looking to increase their spend, which seems to suggest that larger organizations are frightened of it, but then the smaller organizations are quite rightly saying, well, this is actually a little bit of an opportunity for us.
I was going to perhaps kick off a question here, but I think it may link quite nicely actually, because the ones that have decreased the amount of time that they're spending in communications, I guess that may be a reflection of their overall priorities as well, because just from, I have a very different hat and perhaps a different way of thinking of the world, given my background in finance and accounting, but often when you hear of tough economic times happening, there are some tough decisions to be made, and things like management consultants and sometimes marketing budgets can be looked at first. And I wonder if, this is an extraordinary downturn because of the health implications, and it's very different to the global financial crisis in that respect. But if we look at the moment, particularly with regards to startups and scale-ups, how would you suggest prioritizing what could well be limited marketing, content, PR budgets at the moment? Who'd like to go first? Joe, would you like to kick off first?
Okay, with limited budgets, no.
Yes. Yeah.
I think if you're working with a limited budget, I think always the most important thing is to make sure you're really clear about the problems you solve and who are your buyers, or who your target audience is, and the channels they actually live on, where they hang out. Because what happens is that quite often, particularly businesses starting out, they think, oh, we've got to be reaching all of these people across all of these channels, and you don't really have the resource or the money to do that. So being very almost sort of shutting, if you were communicating with lots of channels, almost shutting that down and actually being razor sharp and very sort of tunnel visioned on the ones you're going to use, or the one you're going to use, and be very good at it, and making sure that your message is aligned with what your audience actually needs. So it's actually slowing it down, but being more intense about it.
Okay. Gemma, is that, or actually, why don't you go to Manu next? Manu, is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess, yeah, for example, for us, this channel was definitely the newsletter. And I think regardless of the channel and the kind of form of content that one chooses to focus on, I think it's always a good idea to kind of go back to the basics and ask yourself, what your audience really needs in this, especially in this kind of crisis, and trying to cater that need rather than just kind of advertising your product and service.
Okay.
Just building on what Manu said, that feeds really nicely into from a PR point of view. Certainly, journalists are really interested in what the problem is. That yep. You know, before you go in and throw at them a solution, which is your product, essentially, they want to have a really clear, newsworthy, whether it's a statistic or a new person's point of view, on what the problem is that you're solving. So I think you're absolutely right, Manu. It's about thinking, what does your audience want to hear from me right now? What problems can I help them solve? Is it bigger than my product? How do I weave that into the conversation I'm having with them? And then also, we're talking about kind of creating content. You know, in terms of, you know, I totally agree with you, Adam. The discretionary spend, often PR finds itself in that bucket in times of crisis, and budgets can decrease. I think it's really important to think of every piece of content you produce. How can you use that across the right channels for a little bit of extra effort? So if you're writing a blog for your website and you know that your business targets IT decision makers in financial services companies, are there some simple trade journalists you could pitch that to so they'll publish it as well? So it's just a kind of, how can I use this for a little bit of extra mileage, given that I've taken the trouble to do the thinking and create that piece of content?
So I'm hesitant to use the word unprecedented because it's been used an awful lot, but these really are times such as this. And just from a I guess a reputational or a brand perspective, and question for all of you: how important is what you're doing now, and how long do we think this is going to be remembered for? I know there's the example of Marks and Spencer's, which I'm sure, which perhaps one of you might bring up. But Joe, perhaps we start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that immediately brings to mind the Victoria Beckham story, and that Victoria Beckham had a lot of bad press because she was planning to furlough a load of staff when she, even though the business isn't making money, it's got a lot of investment, and obviously everybody's aware of her personal wealth. And so what happens is you were a bit unforgiving on how we perceived people to be behaving if they're behaving in the wrong way. So I think a lot of people are advocating the fact that brands, whether you're large or small, want to be seen to be doing good. And I think that's not necessarily overtly selling, but it's actually making sure you're available, providing services, providing advice in order to strengthen your relationship. Because what is going to be true, and I think this has happened on other sort of, not other pandemics, we're not that familiar with them, but on other sort of crises, is that it's actually the brands that stand out well from what they did to help or be supportive to other people that are actually remembered for the longevity. And you were mentioning the Marks and Spencer example, and I don't know too much details about that. I think they during the Second World War, was it that they pivoted and did something different in terms of you better elaborate on it, I don't know the full details of it.
Yeah, so I think during World War II, they Marks and Spencer's got involved in taking rag textiles and helping manufacture, make and sell clothes from that. And that compassion that they showed with the citizens of the UK in helping during a national crisis, I think built up an enormous amount of goodwill, which remained with them through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, when perhaps, you know, a generation out, it may have been forgotten a little bit.
And the most recent examples of that are Louis Vuitton. Obviously did a big step forward in terms of going into manufacturing of hand sanitizers, and also Brewdog did that as well. So, but what happens, the risk we have to on this particular call is that, you know, those are bigger brands.
Yes.
And obviously it's quite easy for them to do something and they will get notified for it. It's harder when you're a smaller brand to make sure the perception is strong, and you have to use your channels slightly differently and your message differently.
Okay. Right. Sorry, Gemma.
I was going to add, I totally agree with everything Joe said. I think as well, crises are a time when you can quite quickly win or lose brand equity over how you behave. And I think that we've everything you do during a time of crisis is the only difference is that you're suddenly under the microscope. So all the behavior is looked upon and analyzed, and you're either put on the list of employers who behaved well or who behaved badly or who treated their customers well. And exactly as you've both given examples of, this will stay with you and shape your brand legacy for a long time to come. So I always think it's worth just taking that little bit of extra time before you jump into communicating anything to think, is this something I would be happy to look back on a press clipping of, or a blog written about my company in the decades to come? Would I be proud of how I behaved? And I think that is, some companies are doing that and others are perhaps not taking that time to think it through.
I think that's, sorry, Joe.
No, you actually sort of raised something really important, Gemma, which goes back to Adam's earlier comment about if you've got a limited budget, what you should be doing. One of the things that a lot small businesses fail to do, but actually stands them in good stead, is actually being very inquisitive and direct about their values, what they actually stand for. And I've seen time and time again that the brands, particularly over the past few months, that have a very strong sense of values, they know what those values are. They've stood them in really, really good stead at the moment because they know what they stand for, and then they can align their communications more strongly with that. And it's actually not that hard. It just automatically comes out. And I'm sure, Gemma, you've seen that with some of the businesses that you represent.
Yeah, I think absolutely a crisis is a time to double down on your values and think about how you're treating all of your customers, prospects, employees, investors. I think it's a really important time to do that. And I think we've talked, one thing that strikes me during this particular crisis is we've spoken for years about, a triple bottom line business model. So, people, planet, profit. Profit's a no-brainer for any business in the private sector. Planet, I think we've spoken a lot about in the last few years, quite rightly so. And I think this crisis will bring the people pillar into sharp focus, and people will look at how businesses are behaving and did they look after their people. And by their people, I don't just mean their direct employees, but also their shareholders, whether they're institutional shareholders or, the man on the street. I think their customers, their prospects. I think how people behave in terms of people will be what we look back on this in. And then to both of your points, the more, if you can find a way to talk about that through the content you're putting out there to reassure all of those audiences, all the better for it.
I think I agree with that. I mean, this is a moment for relationships, be it with your employees or your suppliers or your customers or any other stakeholders. This is one where the goodwill in those relationships, that will, if you can strengthen that, and you'll come out the other side a lot stronger. And I've noticed, I did a webinar for one of our clients, Get Slick, who provide technology for a lot of salons, and I don't know too much about the salons business myself, but one of the pieces of advice that was given to everyone was like, well, if you're furloughed and or if you can't work because your salon is shut, is keep maintaining that communication with your clients. And their communication is very much pick up the telephone rather than perhaps tweeting or newsletters or things like that. But it is absolutely just keep up that good communication. Manu, you've been pretty active and pretty busy on the content publication since, well, for the last 2 years at Ignition, but certainly during lockdown. What have you learned and seen during those times?
Well, I think in general, many things for sure. But during lockdown during lockdown, one thing I learned is, well, again, to kind of focus on the audience's needs before anything else. And in terms of going back to kind of managing, limited resources, including time. I think one important thing I learned is to always think about kind of the process of producing content and how efficient that is, and how sustainable it is as well. So yeah, no. Once you figured out kind of what kind of content you want to publish, and what are your values and everything else, a really important thing when you're working with limited resources is to always keep in mind kind of how you manage your time, and what is disposable and what is not.
So we're an organisation which I think it's fair to say we work with limited resource in the marketing and content and definitely PR space. So Manu, how have you? Because there's been so much new news, announcements, changes in market, changes, just so much new information and content. How have you managed to, or how have you successfully learned to manage this or distill it? And actually, one of the compliments we keep hearing over and over again is putting it into plain English and getting it out so promptly. I mean, I know that we some of the information we've been getting out before certain news outlets. So what's been the key there for you?
I think, well, one of the main advantages is that I'm not an accountant myself, so I needed to understand the news in plain English before I could even think about writing them. So that definitely helped. But apart from that, I think we were really quick as an organization. So when the budget originally came out in March, and the week afterwards, most of the government measures were initially announced. I think we were really quick at kind of brainstorming what the best way of supplying this information to our audience was. And to be honest, that was a really good team effort, because yeah, immediately we jumped on the phone and kind of agreed on a strategy, which ended up being kind of setting up a landing page that was constantly updated. And again, I think a crucial part of that was keeping the process in mind of how we would have handled that amount of communications in the coming months. And so the fact that we set up kind of a sustainable process to update that much information so quickly is what made the difference for us.
If I can, there's also an important point there, and that I was involved on some of those conversations. It was being very clear about what your audience needed, and because we're dealing with financial challenges and you were in the financial space, we could align to that. And I'm mentioning that because Gideon Hoffman has had a question whether we're necessarily talking about B2B or B2C. And obviously that's going to change things slightly. A lot of my work is mainly B2B. I'm not a B2C expert, but I think the rules fundamentally stay the same, in that you actually got to understand exactly what it is and what is their pain point at the moment. So if you are B2C, yeah, what is actually the consumer? If it's the salons and people can't book hair appointments, how are you actually going to address that? And it's actually quite a good example, because I know my wife has been trying to get appointments online, but she was actually really impressed because the salon called her up and has been speaking to her personally. And that's going to make a big difference. And she said, I was really impressed. They rang up and talked to me and asked how I was getting on. It's got nothing to do with hair, but it's just a very good example of maintaining relationships.
Definitely. And then just kind of adding if you're a B2B2C, for example, if you were if you supplied, God, this is going to reveal how little I go to the hairdresser, the hairdressing tools, the kind of the specialist scissors or whatever to hairdressers, and you were able to show that your hairdressing salons that you provided this equipment to, that their customers actually were looking for more reassurance from the salons or more communication, you could obviously prove that you had their customer insight. So if you're a B2B to C, it's also worth sometimes thinking about how you can provide that end customer insight to your clients.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I've just seen a message. I've just seen a message coming from Gideon, and that he's communicating with consumers is different and potentially involves media buying, so not quite the same as B2B. And the reason I just sort of mentioned it in terms of the media buying is I have read and seen that if you are doing paid advertising, now is actually a very good time to be doing it, because the prices have come down dramatically. And those people who are wanting to invest in it, then do invest it, because you're going to get some very good deals, and you can potentially get some very good results from that.
Yeah.
Okay. If we were to switch to early stage companies, so startups and scale ups, Gemma, perhaps you could give us a bit of an insight as when should a startup or scale up start thinking about PR and what should they be thinking about in terms of tactics or budgets and all those kinds of things?
Yeah, good question. I think so. We get this question a fair amount. Companies get in touch with us and say, "Oh, we're not sure if it's the right time to invest in PR, but we want to get media coverage. So, does that make us ready for PR?" So, I think the key takeaway is in terms of is now the right time to invest in PR? Do you have a clear business objective that PR could support? So, for example, are you going to fundraise and you'd like to get some profile with your investor audience ahead of and during the fundraise? Have you got aggressive customer acquisition targets? So do you need a PR firm support helping you identify the channels to reach those customers and the right media outlets to use? Do you want to hire a new executive team? Can PR help you with getting eyeballs on the content which is going to attract people into your business at that senior level? So I guess there's no right answer to when you would invest in PR, but I think any decent agency will have that conversation with you and ask you what your business objectives are, and then advise on whether PR can or can't support them. Just to give you an example, I had a startup about 6 months ago come to me and say, we're just going to target cafes in Hackney, and we want a PR program that will do that. And I said, to be honest, for the fee, you're just better off going and knocking on all the cafes in Hackney. You don't need a PR agency to tell you how to get into the Hackney Gazette. You can just go yourself. So that would be an instance where we would say, PR is probably not quite right for you. Have you thought about digital channels and directly targeting the owners of these cafes? On the other hand, you could have a startup kind of done a seed round and looking to increase their profile with their decision-making audience, and they're not quite sure of a campaign that they need to do that. So they could come to a PR agency and say, we want some thinking around this campaign for an idea that's going to resonate with our audience, so we can see an uptick in website traffic, lead gen. I guess another thing just to point out is that PR can work really at any stage of the sales funnel, but typically people come to a PR agency when they look for an in-house PR hire when they're really looking at that kind of top awareness piece of the funnel. That's kind of where PR traditionally has sat.
This might be a bit left field, but do you ever help with PR with because I know you work a lot with tech companies, but do they ever come to you requesting PR support, perhaps because they're about to go into an investment round or investment cycle? Because there seems to be an awful amount of PR around raising investment, closing investment rounds on TechCrunch and the financial press, as a lot of tech startups and scale-ups have become more mainstream in the reporting in the press.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They do. I think what is slightly frightening actually is often we get the companies will come to us and say, we're starting an investment round, and we want your help placing stories about our business so investors can see it, so we're more likely to get a foot in the door or have traction in the meetings. And we'll say, okay, send us your investor deck. And they haven't always got their narrative sorted. So you need a story. Investors want to know the hard metrics and your roadmap, how you're going to scale your business, and grow revenue, start turning a profit. But they also need to have that storytelling element that's going to capture their attention in the first place. So that's often where we start with businesses. We say, right, let's actually look at the problem you're solving in the market and bring it to life in an interesting way, because that's your best shot at getting investors' attention. And obviously, once you've got that narrative and messaging in place, that then informs all of the PR activity or communications activity that you would do going forward beyond that investment round.
Perhaps I could maybe ask each of you, content, PR, and marketing or branding generally. Do you have any tips for founders of early stage businesses? Let's say they're kind of the seed to Series A stage in your respective areas. Manu, perhaps we could start with you.
Yes, I think a very common mistake, especially at the early stage of doing marketing in any context, is kind of getting stuck either with a strategy, or with a channel that's not working, or with a piece of content that's taking too long to produce. But I think something I learned in these 2 years is that if it's okay to just leave something if you see it's not working, or it's just taking too much time, and it's more important to focus on the activities that you see kind of giving results, and if not that, kind of those activities that feel more natural to produce. So sometimes it will take me 2 days to write a blog, and that's how I know that that's just not going to work, and I have to leave it for a second before I go back to it and make it work maybe a couple of months later.
Okay. Joe.
Yeah, I think if you're getting into that area of sort of Series A onwards, you probably need to make sure you've got a communication plan. And people may think, oh God, this is an effort that we're going to have to put into, but you definitely need to do it. And that means being very clear about your business goals, who your audience is, and doing some profiling on that. Having the strategy, and the strategy is the approach, because what then comes is the tactics. And quite often businesses muddle up strategy with tactics, and it's being very clear about what the approach is. So with Ignition, your approach is very much in terms of content with a newsletter. And then finally, at the bottom of that is how you're going to measure things. But the other really important bit, which everybody forgets or gets frightened of, I think, is about frequency of communication, because they're then frightened they're going to be spamming people, or they're going to be around too much. But what happens is, when you publish frequently, whether that's on articles or whether it's a bit of social media, so long as you're doing it in the right way, what frequency does, it produces consistency, but from that consistency becomes familiarity, and then from that familiarity then comes trust. And I think getting into the habit of doing things frequently is a good one to do, but it's actually very hard, particularly if you're a small business and you've got massive things to do. You think, how on earth am I going to try and find the time to do it? And it's no easy answer. You just have to find the time.
I think that's interesting, the point you make on frequency, because I know from sitting next to Manu in the office, which we used to occupy, that our newsletters, we would do them fortnightly, and they would be very much on a routine basis. But since COVID and the lockdown, then they've been going out when we think our audience needs to hear an update. And actually, some of the I don't know if these are the right benchmarks to measure success or otherwise, but I know the open rates and the click rates have been higher, and despite the frequency increasing, it's unsubscribes and all the rest of it have come right down. So is that kind of tallying with what you both think then, Joe, Manu?
Yes, but I think what the important point is what we were talking about at the very beginning of the webinar. It's about relevancy.
Mm.
And so long as it's relevant, there's a reason for doing it. And it doesn't really matter if people aren't going, nobody's going to read absolutely everything every single time. That doesn't matter. I call it as sort of, sometimes when you're sending out things, it's just a little tap on the shoulder. It's just a reminder. It's just like the salon ringing up and saying, hi, how are you? We don't have an appointment. It's just making sure that you're visible. Goes back to that earlier point of staying there, because there'll become one thing, and it could be, let's say, bounce back loans, or it could be a discount on some consumer product that you're promoting. That will be the occasion. But if you're not doing it, then they won't know about you.
Gemma, perhaps are there some tips that you would give to startups and scale ups around about that seed Series A stage, perhaps thinking about dipping their toe into the world of PR?
Yeah, I mean, I guess everything that Manu and Joe have said is absolutely true, in terms of how you think about, you need your strategy, you need your approach, and then you can think about kind of content creation. And PR is often an amplification of that storytelling. So using media or other stakeholder groups to get your story in front of the right audiences. Frequency is an interesting one. Let's think about, from a PR perspective, you think about the news cycle, it's changed enormously with COVID. You used to kind of pitch a story maybe the day before, to embargo it until the following morning, and then line up your broadcast interviews or your print interviews, whatever it was. And it's all kind of gone out of the window now with COVID, because the news cycle is just happening so fast. And newsroom meetings are, if they're even happening, they're happening at kind of every few hours rather than at a set time in the morning. I think that companies during a time like this, they shouldn't be afraid to use PR to talk about the good things they're doing. If, exactly to Joe's point, if they're relevant, if they have relevancy, if their product is relevant, if their offering is relevant, what they're doing is relevant. I think companies often get worried that they will be seen to sort of be ambulance chasing if they're commenting on COVID. But actually, I mean, there's a kind of huge middle ground. You've got, I don't know if you remember Quantum Corporation, I think it was the day after 9/11, tweeted not tweeted, Twitter probably wasn't even around then, published a statement saying that Morgan Stanley had been able to continue operations the day after 9/11 because of that, thanks to their wonderful cloud technology. And it was absolute chaos. They had to retract the statement 5 minutes later. But then you've got brands which are actually genuinely pivoting to offer relevant services during a time like now, which I think they should be shouting about and they should be talking about. And PR is a great way that they can, a great sort of method of getting that message out there to their audiences.
So is it a case of going with perhaps what feels right at this moment? And there is a lot to be said for compassion, helping other people out, and not thinking about winning new business or anything like that at this moment, because that will come. So it is an investment at the moment of sorts.
I think we have to be, I think it is an investment. I think we have to be careful. I think there are a lot of companies doing very good things who right now might be the perfect moment for them to start doing PR. And they might have a really relevant product offering. They might be offering insurance to invoice finance insurance to SMEs. I mean, and they might have seen the government's announcement yesterday about the kind of trade credit insurance guarantee and thought, oh God, I can be a part of that. I can help with that. This is the moment I've been waiting for. And I think there are businesses that should be taking a leap and looking at how they use this time to communicate with the audiences they want to about a very relevant product. And then I think there are others that should continue doing or should be thinking about PR, but acknowledging that perhaps they're not as relevant at this moment in time. So how are they going to either make themselves more relevant in the conversation or just be very aware of and tread a bit more carefully with certain media or certain audiences?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point about the trade credit insurance, because I know that there is we know a startup that is in that area, and I've seen their LinkedIn posts and their tweets, and quite rightly they're there to support that new the new service and support from the government. So knowing most startups and scale ups, they are agile, quick to react, and they will, they should be looking to be agile and quick to react with regards to their marketing, content, and PR.
Yeah, definitely.
If we could turn on to our final topic, which is lessons from the COVID-19 crisis. It'd be quite interesting to hear what the lessons you've learned from this crisis are, and how you think you may be doing things differently with your clients in the future, in the near future. I know you don't have crystal balls, but it's always good to hear opinions on this topic of how people's worlds they think may change a little. Okay. Joe, you go first.
In fact, I was struck by something, and people watching this may not be familiar with. Mark Ritson, marketing guy, was talking about that, and that was that the sort of the fundamentals of marketing, price, product, place, promotion, are actually as valid today as they've ever been, and that everybody gets hung up on sort of digital and all the channels, but I think probably what this has done, it's forced us to go back to looking at some of the basics of marketing and communication. And it's also forced us to try to communicate with a little bit more integrity now. And that, I think that for me goes back to values. And I think the brands that are able to do that are the ones that are standing out, because there's people's sort of bullshit radar is finely attuned at the moment. And I think that's the takeaway I get from it. Also, the fact that one has to remember that in difficult times and recessions, new businesses, new ideas do crop up. Airbnb, Slack, and WhatsApp, they all cropped up. And then also another one which people don't often talk about is actually Disney. Disney set up in 1929, just before the Great Depression in the States. And the film that came out there was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So extraordinary things do happen.
Gemma.
So I think lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis on a really tactical level, I think we are seeing, encouraging businesses to pivot to digital with all of their communications. That might sound really obvious, but the fact that the four of us are here chatting on a webinar, when previously this presumably would have been either an in-person event, which would have required a lot more setup perhaps, or it wouldn't have happened. And I think it's great how quickly a lot of businesses, a lot of people in this webinar, there's sorts of businesses, high growth, smaller businesses have been able to pivot to digital. Maybe they were sort of digital first already, but take the events space. So online panels, online webinars. It's great to see how much content is being produced and how interactive events are still happening at large organizations as well. And I think that's a really nice thing to know, actually, for all businesses coming out of this crisis, that you can speak to your clients virtually, business still can be done virtually, you can still have the sort of interaction, you can still ultimately reach the people that you need to without having to do large scale in-person events. So that's a big lesson I'm taking out of this.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think many of our clients already were aware of and use a lot of the tools like Zoom and GoTo and Slack and things like that. But for the vast majority of SMEs in the UK, they won't be. I was speaking yesterday with a lawyer who's just joined a medium-sized firm in London during this, and they some of her new colleagues were getting excited because they're getting laptops for the first time, because they all work at desktops in an office, and it's that is probably quite there's going to be lots of other businesses out there like that who the acceleration of digital has happened and is going to only accelerate further, isn't it? So that's, I think, a good point. Manu, what have you kind of your lessons from the COVID-19 crisis, and how do you think we'll be doing things differently in terms of our content creation going forward?
So on a more strategic, from a more strategic point of view, as Joe mentioned, I think it's a lot about learning to pivot more quickly and going back to basics. So like kind of realizing that in all crises, it's not like the whole world stops all of a sudden, even if it feels that way. There's just a different context, and you have to reevaluate, starting from your values. How can you communicate your values to your audience in this context? So, for example, and that obviously ties in with what Gemma was saying about transitioning to digital-only communications. And well, the other thing is that I think we all realized that when people are under this amount of stress, you really have to kind of make a step, walk the extra mile and put yourself in their shoes and kind of design a communication that works for your clients, because under this much stress, no one in your audience is going to make an effort to adapt to your communication, and it has to be the other way around, because there's just not enough. I guess people just don't have the bandwidth to cope with communication that is not tailored to them. Okay. So I think that's something very easy to kind of to carry on doing after the crisis as well.
Okay, I think we've just reached just gone past our quarter two mark. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up there nice and early, so people can get a bit of a rest from any homeschooling which they may or may not have been doing, and get to their Friday night quizzes, which everyone seems to be doing right now. Joe, Gemma, Manu, thank you very much for your time. If anyone's watching this wanted to get some support or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it, Gemma?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my email address is gemma.dunn@missive.co.uk. Or you can go to the Missive website, and we actually run free PR clinics for 1 hour if you just wanted to bounce ideas around about you're thinking about dipping your toe into PR, should you? Very happy to have a chat. So get in contact with me directly or through the website. Oh, brilliant. And you can book those, can you book those slots on the website? You can indeed. If not, it will link you, it will kind of create an email which will come to me. So yes, you can go straight through the website. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. That's going to be so useful for, I think we might take you up on that. And Joe, on the marketing communication side?
Yes, if you go to the website, that's Pelissier, that's PELISSIER.co.uk. You can contact me through there, or you can send me an email, which is joe@pelissier.co.uk. And I'm very happy just to talk to anybody if they want to just sort of discuss ideas or explore things, or just want some opinions. More than happy, very happy to do that. And we'll follow up with details of the websites and emails and things like that with our usual follow-up. Okay. Thank you very much, Joe, Manu, Gemma, and to everyone who's joined in. Have a super weekend when it arrives. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.